killing Tutsi children to wipe out the next generation.
And the world turned its back.
How can they not intervene? Hundreds of thousands are dying.
If people see this, they'll say, oh my God, that's horrible. And then go on eating their dinners.
All the whites are leaving, even the UN soldiers.
All the superpowers, everything you believe in, Paul, they're not gonna stop the slaughter.
That's Nick Nolte playing Canada's General Romeo Dallaire in Hotel Rwanda. It's the backstory of why a genocide could not be stopped. Today we ask, is South Sudan next? Why is the world ignoring a UN alarm over a risk of mass atrocities in South Sudan? Refugees fleeing from many places in Africa and the Middle East, and here in Canada, some have even walked through the biting cold over the Manitoba border to get into our country. We speak with an immigration and border issues expert.
Conscious awakening is the revolution that we want to start here. People come in and connect, share their stories or their skills, and have use that situation to make an impact around the world.
That's musical artist Emmanuel Jal sharing his talents for South Sudan, where raising consciousness about the situation there is getting more difficult in the midst of the media's attention on everything President Trump. Sudan's grim civil war is once again playing out to heartbreaking proportions. Upwards of 1 million people have had to flee their homes to Ugandan refugee camps with little more than a blanket to sleep on that harsh land. We'll speak with a former Sudanese refugee and a representative from the UN Refugee Agency on the ground in South Sudan. Our focus, why the United Nations is warning that the world's newest country, South Sudan, is on the edge of collapse, threatening the safety of millions. To find out what's happening, we spoke with Eugene Byun from the United Nations Refugee Agency in South Sudan. The United Nations eyes on the ground in South Sudan are Eugene Byun. Eugene, thank you for being with us. Tell us now about the situation there on the ground in South Sudan.
Since 2016 July, there was a conflict in Juba, and that conflict intensified, and then a conflict is spreading, and then more and more South Sudanese people fleeing to a neighboring country, seeking for safety.
And refugees from Juba have had to flee back roads to these refugee camps. It sounds like a high-risk venture.
The majority of refugees arriving in Uganda is from Equatoria region of South Sudan, where there is intense fighting is still ongoing. For example, Yei and then Keji Kajo in recently fighting broke out, and then it triggered a lot of refugee influx in Uganda. And then, of course, the situation that there is a region that the people are fleeing to a neighboring country because the situation is dire. And then there is some part of the region that even humanitarian agency cannot have access because of insecurity.
We're listening because we're concerned. What can we do?
This South Sudan crisis is a somewhat forgotten crisis. And I want a Canadian I know the Canadian is always a generous donor for UNHCR and then other humanitarian agency. And then they're always welcoming the refugee and immigrant in their country. So I hope Canadian stand up with the other international community and then to have interest, talking about the South Sudan crisis.
There are Christians in Kejokiji as well who've had to flee to Ugandan refugee camps. Can you speak to that?
The third week of January, there is intense fighting broke out, the nearby Kejokiji. But I have to emphasize again that this conflict is spreading in South Sudan. It's not only Kajokeji, it's Kajokeji and then the neighboring area, and also the Upper Nile state and then Unity State. It's really, for me, it's a very alarming sign for South Sudanese people.
Is there still hope for a peace resolution, or is a bloodbath inevitable?
We hope, as a humanitarian agency, we really hope. And then when I go out and talk to South Sudanese, I still feel that they still have a hope. There is a people who are willing to stay in their country, because South Sudanese, when you see their history, those people are displaced so many times. So they thought that they're finally in their country. So even there is insecurity, there is some South Sudanese willing to stay in the country.
You know, we do have trouble getting people to stay focused on a crisis like South Sudan. Why should we care?
Rather than a child crying, I want the audience to see the child smiling. And when you see those smile, and for me, whenever I got depressed, and then when I am disencouraged, I always go to the camp and talk to the mother and then a child. And then when you talk to mother and child, and then when you see their smile, and then when you see they're still resilient, and when you see they still have a hope for a better future, I think that's why the world continue to help them.
Okay, thank you. That was Eugene Byun, the Public Information Officer at the United Nations Camp for Refugees in South Sudan in Africa. So what if it was your mom? Your mom that was one of those refugees trying to escape the impending terror in South Sudan. We're going to have that story with a Canadian refugee from Sudan very shortly. But first, Sheldon, you've been chatting up a storm on social media. What are people saying?
Thank you so much, Laura. That is indeed true. I want to let you know about a hashtag that really has been perhaps on the front line of what we've been talking about here, that being hashtag persecuted church. I want to draw your attention to our screen here that you may see. Islamic terrorists destroy 900 churches in war-torn country. A little graphic there. I want to keep it moving as well. Interesting letter, handwritten letter here. It says, powerful, humbling reminder that God is the bedrock of the believer as we pray for hashtag persecuted church in North Korea and Sudan. Interesting thing here, can't read it all, but it says, pray for the hundreds and thousands of Christians held in prison camps in North Korea facing many things, starvation, slave labor, etc. But people really take into social media to really share their thoughts. I want to bring something else here. It says, pray for the persecuted church, Sudan. Pray for marginalized and persecuted Christians to forgive, love, and pray for their persecutors. Listen, if you want to engage with us online, I want you to visit at Context TV at any point throughout today's program. Drop us a comment about any of the interviews you see. We'd love to discuss that and more. Or if you're a Facebook lover, why don't you join us at Context with Lorna Duick and leave a comment there. We'd love to discuss that on the air. But for now, that is your social media and online update.
I'm Molly Thomas for Context TV here in Somaliland. Take a look at this soil. It tells a story. Dust, arid, and hardly any rain in this region for the past 2 years. We are reporting from a country on the brink of famine.
Molly's story coming on Context in March.
I see answers to refugee prayers almost every week.
Moses Mwini gives us a first-hand account of what life is like living in exile.
Next week on Context, we visit the town where Elizabeth Wettlaufer allegedly killed 8 seniors at a nursing home in London, Ontario. We're on the ground getting reaction from residents and people who knew her.
I wish the world was a little bit fatter. Time to start looking at the man in the mirror.
That was Canadian Sudanese singer and activist Emmanuel Jal. Well, Canada's Sudanese community is on full alert over a fear that South Sudan will soon erupt in what the United Nations warns are mass atrocities. Moses Mouini fled Sudan. He now works in refugee settlement in Canada. Welcome to Context.
Thank you.
This is real, isn't it? We could be looking at another Rwanda in your country of South Sudan.
Several reports have indicated that there's an impending genocide that is going to happen in the country. What we have seen beginning from July of last year is the country has been thinning out in so many ways. People have been fleeing. People have abandoned their communities. People have risked to go into exile. People are in a very, very desperate situation. So it is very important that these warning signs are taken very, very seriously.
Very serious warning signs. They affect your mom.
Yes. 2 weeks ago, after holding on for a very long time, hoping they would not cross into exile again for the third time in her life, she finally had no choice and had to leave.
You think, okay, this is so moving to me because you built your mom's house. You thought things were stable. You left here in Canada, were able to go back, build this beautiful little house for her there in this brand new country of South Sudan that's only 3 years old. What is it like for her today? What do you fear could happen to your mom?
When South Sudan was created, there was just so much optimism and people were so excited about the efforts that had gone into the creation of this country, the prayers that went into it, the international efforts, the diplomacy that went into the creation of that nation. All that excited us so much, even as South Sudanese in the diaspora. Hence, I went home and helped build this house for my mom. Beautiful house she has lived in. So since July last year, when people started leaving the country, one of the things that she didn't want to do at her old age is, I don't want to go and die in exile again.
And I'm sorry, it's happening again. She's on the run again, left that beautiful house. And this is a racial war because the President Kiir, Vice President Makar are at each other, and they are two different warring tribes. This time they've got very big weapons. It doesn't look good. We've got to do something.
It doesn't look too good at all because, these two leaders are backed by their tribes, and very long conflict that has existed between the two tribes that had carried on for years and now has been brought onto the political sphere where...
You're asking us to pray about this. You really believe God needs to intervene. Tell us about God in the refugee crisis like this.
In the refugee crisis, things can be very, very difficult. Life can be extremely hopeless. But the only thing that we can only hang on to is that the history of South Sudan itself has been a history of displacement. The first displacement started in 1972, in 1955.
I just got to ask, why is faith in God still holding on there?
Well, you see, each and every time people have been displaced, God has been faithful and people have been able to return back to their land. First time, second time, and even the third time now for my mom when she was leaving. I told mom that I'm just so frustrated with the situation in South Sudan. I wish I can find some funds and build for you a house in Uganda.
And you did it, and God has been so faithful.
Yeah, in Uganda. And then she said, what about my house? And I said, okay, hang on to that hope, and you'll come back to it. So,
Moses, stay with us online. Is that all right?
Thank you.
No, stay with us. We're going to put you into Facebook. Sheldon's going to put you into there right now. Continue your important work of settling refugees. And we're going right now to Sheldon. Obviously, our viewers have got something to say about this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorna. Lorna, I was in Toronto and people had a lot to say about the refugee crisis. Take a look at this.
Honestly, I think that Canada's known for being a multicultural country. I think that people should do both keep their culture and stay true to that, but also to take into consideration the country that they're living in and the customs and culture here as well.
Our refugees come to Canada, been here for 10 years, ask them any question. What question would you ask them?
How have you adjusted? How does it differ from where you came from, and are you thriving?
It's working out very nicely.
Coming up, we take a look at how the chaos around the current travel ban situation could be affecting humanitarian efforts and what people in Canada have to say.
Next week on Context, we visit the town where Elizabeth Wettlaufer allegedly killed 8 seniors at a nursing home in London, Ontario. We're on the ground getting reaction from residents and people who knew her.
PureFlix.com is now available in Canada. Sign up today for your free 1-month trial and begin streaming over 3,500 titles.
It's from independent films to movies and short series.
Kids shows. Sign up for a free month. Give it a good try.
Watch your favorite content anywhere, anytime, like PureFlix original hit series Encounter. Enjoy the latest and best in faith and family entertainment. Available to you at the click of a button. Visit PureFlix.com and sign up for your free trial today. Brought to you by Crossroads.
I spoke with Jalari Massa about how the problems her community faces came long before the travel ban, as well as on assimilating into Canada. Take a look.
For a lot of Muslims, especially for visibly Muslim women, Islamophobia is always heightened. So we hear stories of women in London, Ontario getting their hijabs ripped off. We hear the ways in which, we had a national debate around the niqab and whether women wearing a niqab in this country could become citizens. So I think that kind of on an institutional, more systemic level, a lot of us face and see the ways in which policies have an impact on our lives, but in our day-to-day interactions, in our classrooms or in our workplaces, I think that for the most part, people try to be accepting and really help try to understand one another.
Is it difficult, for instance, would you say, for young Syrian refugees to assimilate into Canadian culture? Do you find that, do they even want to? Is there a tug of war taking place?
You really have a desire to embrace the place that has embraced you as a newcomer or somebody who is fleeing, some really abject situations. But there are things that kind of prevent that from happening. So poverty, language barriers, weather, the reality of being in a new country make it difficult to adjust.
Are fears of Muslim refugees, would you find them to be founded, especially when we look at the atrocities that are in the news? Sometimes they seem to be from Muslim backgrounds and people make those assumptions and categorize. But would you say, based on what we're reading and seeing, that we get it. We get why people make these assumptions and why these fears are in place.
Most of these attacks are actually happening by right-wing white supremacist groups and not Islamic terrorists coming from, lurking through the borders and getting their ways in here. So it's really happening from people who are living here, people who we think that we are safe around. I think that our government sometimes benefit from creating an us versus them and creating a demon out of Syrian refugees who really, or refugees in general, who really are coming here to seek a better life.
The Trump travel ban is right now in a place of pause, in a place of legal gymnastics, as you know. What's the sense you're getting from Muslim culture and those on the ground in your communities?
As a Muslim traveling into the U.S., especially when you're visibly Muslim, if you wear a hijab, if you have a beard, if you're perceived as Muslims, because even people who aren't Muslim, but they wear a turban or look a particular way, sometimes get perceived as Muslim. It's always been challenging to go through the U.S. My family has a rule that we don't even have a stopover in the U.S. because it always comes with some added scrutiny that feels unnecessary and feels pretty invasive. So this was happening before Trump, and it was even happening before 9/11, but became heightened at that point. With the Trump ban, though, I think that it really criminalized a particular looking person, and I think that that's where the fear and the hurt came from a lot of Muslims.
Do they feel that now that a sense of law is on their side, that maybe things are turning around for the better, perhaps?
I think a lot of us know that people are on our side and people, for the most part, are looking for truth and justice. But it's also just going back and people are going back and forth. It exists and then it doesn't exist, and then it's allowed and it's not allowed. It's happening at the borders. It has been happening well before Trump even came into existence.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
That's former child soldier and Sudanese refugee Emmanuel Jal, who promised God if he got out of where he was, he would always give God the glory.
Now that it's lifted, due to court orders, more people trying to get to the U.S. than before.
Coming up, On our watch, as citizens proud and free, the challenge to respond to the largest refugee crisis since World War II. A Ryerson professor answers some of those questions about border security and vetting the process in Canada.
Next week on Context, we visit the town where Elizabeth Wettlaufer allegedly killed 8 seniors at a nursing home in London, Ontario. We're on the ground getting reaction from residents and people who knew her.
PureFlix.com is now available in Canada. Sign up today for your free 1-month trial and begin streaming over 3,500 titles.
It's from independent films to movies and short series.
Kids shows. Sign up for a free month. Give it a good try.
Watch your favorite content anywhere, anytime, like PureFlix original hit series Encounter. Enjoy the latest and best in faith and family entertainment. Available to you at the click of a button. Visit PureFlix.com and sign up for your free trial today. Brought to you by Crossroads.
Well, if you think it feels like the global refugee crisis is getting worse, you're right. 65 million people have been forced to flee their homes in global unrest, and the United Nations reports those numbers have never before hit such highs. And the upheaval is making those of us with secure homes ask, what do we do about this crisis? Sheldon Neal went looking for answers.
Borders mean different things in different contexts and for different people. If we use the example of the US administration right now, I think we can say that the border, the way that the US administration conceives it, is sort of a wall that protects, that defines the inside of the United States and the outside, and separates good from evil, if you want. In other contexts, like what you just mentioned in Manitoba and Quebec and places where refugees are now coming to Canada, if you assume the refugees' perspective, it's a very different idea of the border. Once they reach the border, they reach safety. They are safe, they have a livelihood. Canada has a very different approach to the border and sees it often as a business opportunity, as a border where Canada selects people that can excel in the Canadian labor market. So it's a very different idea of the border depending on who you're talking to and depending on what context you're talking to.
What should we be thinking about when it comes to this country's vetting process?
I would think that people who are already in the US have undergone this kind of process. I'm sure that the Canadian government will do whatever is necessary to make sure that that Canadians are protected. But I don't think we should make the assumption that just because people come to Canada to seek safety, that there is an inherent danger. There could be the odd exception, but I think it's more important to realize that people are looking for security, they're looking for safety, and that's what really matters.
Now, the Trump travel ban is currently on pause and somewhat stuck in a legal arena, as it were. What does this mean for culture at the border for both nations abroad, in the U.S. and in Canada?
Now that it's lifted due to court orders, people are actually more people trying to get to the U.S. Than before, and everybody wants to get in before it closes again. So I haven't seen the numbers, but I wouldn't be surprised if the numbers are higher now than they were before. Also, people who are already in the U.S. are not going to leave because they're afraid they can't return. So I think in terms of the achievement of a travel ban is quite contradictory. I think it probably achieves exactly the opposite of what it claims to achieve.
We're hearing stories of refugees braving the harsh, cold Canada weather to seek a place of refuge, a place of safety. I'm wondering, when we hear these stories, because after all, we're all human at our core, does this soften our borders in any way, hearing stories such as these?
Aren't these the kind of people that Canada would want to embrace? And people who are making sacrifices to be here, who really want to be here, who are not just here for a business opportunity, who really need to be here. I think these are the kind of people that probably make good Canadians because they make sacrifices.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Well, among the global crisis in refugees are over 1 million displaced South Sudanese. They're voiceless. Sheldon spoke earlier with a humanitarian worker who just returned from there 2 weeks ago.
Tom Zarowski is a missions partner for South Sudan and Central Africa with Voice of the Martyrs Canada. He is also the founder and director of Global Response Network, GRN, a worldwide outreach initiative. He joins me now. Tom, let's jump right into this. You just got back from South Sudan. Give us a sense of the flourishing of Christian faith on the ground there.
Yeah, I think if I was going to say anything about flourishing of Christian faith, I would say that in the midst of all their suffering and the pain that they're experiencing, they still believe. They're still looking to God for answers. They're still looking to Him for comfort. And to me, that is probably one of the greatest acts of faith, because with all the death and the starvation and all the displacement, they look to God. They don't stop.
How does a message of Jesus stand to offer literally any hope to a people facing such incredible odds? We weren't able to unpack it all, but there's some dire situations there. How does the message of Jesus really shine through all that?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, what I would say is that the message of Jesus is a message of hope. You know, there's a lot of things that people can live without. They can live without clothes. They can live without homes. They can live without a lot of things. I found that in South Sudan with these people. But no man can live without hope. And when Jesus, the message of Jesus, enters into a situation like the people are experiencing in South Sudan right now, it brings them hope. And for them, for many of them, that's all they have.
Wow, hope, getting them through those rough times. Tom, I wish we can talk a little bit more. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That was Tom Zarowski, missions partner for South Sudan and Central Africa with Voice of the Martyrs Canada. He's also founder and director of Global Response Network. He joined me from Kentucky.
Question, should we welcome refugees? Well, let's go to school with that for the church I know best. This week, evangelical church leaders in 50 American states made a plea over their country's moratorium on refugee resettlement. In the words of their protest, they asked for compassion and security to coexist. They reminded us that for the persecuted and suffering, every day matters. Every delay is a crushing blow to hope. Context has had a hand in sponsoring 2 war-torn refugee families to Canada, and from our experience, the closer you move to broken-hearted dreams and refugee loss, the healthier people become. On both sides of the equation, the concept of what it is to be a good neighbor becomes transformative. The Bible calls us to care for those who are in distress and to treat others as we would want to be treated. So do we want to welcome the refugees? You betcha. Thanks for joining us on Context. We've left lots of good tools for how you can get engaged in this unprecedented crisis from Sudan, South Sudan, all the way to here. See what you can do to help. Bye-bye.